I want to pivot over now and get a little bit deeper industry perspective and get a little more dialogue as far as how this might affect and how different segments might be able to participate. So I'm going to ask Chuck Adami, Jim Lovell, and Myriah Johnson to come up for our next panel. As they're coming up, I'll give you a little bit of background. We've got perspectives from the markets and the dairy that Chuck has. Chuck's been involved for years and years as the head of Equity Livestock in Wisconsin. He's been involved in a lot of these discussions over the years. Jim's going to bring probably more of a beef perspective, production perspective on it, and same I think for Myriah, who's of the Noble Foundation. She's going to give us, I think, a great perspective from what they do, the sustainability, and how this can fit into a sustainability model. Focus. I mean, she's grown up as a producer as well, so I think we're going to have a really good opportunity to start focusing a little bit more of a laser. How might this structure work for these key segments? So I've got two of the three, and I'm about to have my third, which is great. Do you mind if we just go simply in alphabetical order and Chuck, start with you and let you present kind of a dual perspective, not only from the markets, but also he's going to be taking Mo Phelon of Holstein Association, gave her an apology, she wasn't able to make it, but Chuck deals with a lot of dairy producers in his area, and I think he can help us with that perspective as well. So Chuck, can we start with you?
It's been my problem my whole life. Microphone. I always have had to go first with my name. I'm the president and CEO of Equity Cooperative, and it is a member-driven livestock marketing organization that operates about 14 livestock markets in a number of collection points in 3 upper Midwest states, Wisconsin, Iowa, and Minnesota. Our membership is made up of about 29,000 farmer ranchers, with about 75% of them in the dairy or dairy cattle business. I'll start with dairy. I was asked, as Glenn had mentioned, to take Maureen's place. So I'm just going to give you a little bit of information that I've gleaned over the last and I've been involved in this for 20 years, the last 20 years, from our dairy producers. They have, for a long time, been utilizing individual animal identification. It's used primarily by them for breeding and management purposes. Currently, EID, electronic identification, is prevalent in larger dairies, and I'm talking about dairies in our area that are 200 head or greater, with the classic dairies, less than 200, mostly still using bangle ear tags. There is little to no use of any ID in bull calves coming to market in the first few weeks of life. The majority of dairy producers believe in having a robust traceability system. They're aware of disease transfer possibilities due to the movement of their animals, the confinement of their animals, and the outside contact at their farms. Dairy's concerns about moving forward are minimal compared to some of the things I've heard today. They're concerned about having to put an electronic ID into a bull calf that's going to leave their premise that's less than a week old. They don't see the value in it. And the way it's handled currently is our livestock markets actually are the ones that are applying that identification. We're using bright tags currently. We would probably have to go to EID if that's what the mandate was. Requiring an EID for a cull cow that was born, raised through its life, and then finally being phased out of production, going to slaughter, seems to them to be unreasonable. And they're concerned about as you've heard elsewhere, the cost of the system, the entire system, and who pays for it. Turning quickly to our markets. As I said, we operate 14 markets, with some operating 5 to 6 times a month and others operating 4 to 5 days a week. Three of our markets operate in close proximity of state lines, so consequently we are aware of ADT. We've lived with it since its inception. In the last year, we handled about 700,000 cattle, which is down just a little from the prior 2 years. The split between feeders and replacements and fat cattle and cull cows is about 50-50 for us. We also at livestock markets are aware of and agree that a traceability system properly implemented is needed for disease control and potential increased market value. I'll turn to my concerns, although most of them have been aired this morning. We're concerned about the technology or technologies that are going to be required. Specifically, we're concerned that we may have to try and deal with more than one type of technology. For instance, today it's been talked about LF and UHF. Those are two different technologies, and it would double our cost unless some technology was put together that could put those two together, and so far I don't know of any, but I'm sure somebody out there can tell me. I'm concerned about the point in time, although we're only talking about enhancing a bookend system, I'm concerned about when the system goes to full traceability. That requires additional cost to us, capital improvements. I'm concerned about the neutrality of a traceability system so that all in the livestock system are treated the same way, and it's not set up to favor one type of marketing over another. In other words, if there's things that's going to be imposed on livestock markets, then it needs to be imposed on dealers and any other methodology that's utilized to market animals. As I had said, I'm concerned, and we must minimize the inefficiencies or negative economic impacts that arise every time we add to a system or begin a new system. One of our markets, it's in Monroe, Wisconsin. It's right on the border of Illinois and Iowa. A vast majority of the animals that come into us currently are moving across state lines. And the system as it sits right now requires us to identify those animals and produce ICBIs or have ICBIs produced by veterinarians. The methodology that we've used to try and be as efficient as possible is we put news tags in every animal that comes in because we don't know when they come in where they're going to go. It's easier for us to tag them all than wait until after the sale and figure out how to tag the ones that are going to go out of state. That's an economic impact for us. Moving to technology such as EID could actually streamline that process for us if we can figure out how to get that information into our sales software. So I thought I'd like to finish with just a little story. When I was a young child, I always had a difficult time going to sleep at night. It was because I believed that there was something under the bed that was going to come out and get me if I fell asleep. And that continued until I reached adulthood and finally had enough money to say to myself, I think I'm going to go to a psychiatrist and see if he can help me. So I did. And I told the psychiatrist of my problem, and he said, I can help you. All you have to do is come 3 times a week for 1 year, and we can cure you of that problem. And I said, well, what's that going to cost? And he said, well, it'll be about $80 a visit. Well, being from Wisconsin, I said, I'll think about it, and I left. And being from Wisconsin, you know where I went to think about it? The local tavern. I sat down and I was having a couple of beers and I told the bartender my problem. He says, I can cure you. I went back home, and a couple of weeks later I ran into the psychiatrist at the store. And he said, how come you haven't come back to visit? I said, well, I did the math. It was $80 a visit for a week. That's $12,500 in a year. I stopped at the bar and my bartender cured me, and it cost me $9, $3 a beer. He said, he cured you. How did he do that? He said, he told me, go home and cut the legs off the bed. Now, the point of my story is that sometimes the problem, and we have a problem, consumes us such that we put it off and we accept the consequences, when a viable and acceptable solution was always there. So thank you.
I'm Jim Lovell, and I am the immediate past chairman of the Texas Cattle Feeders Association, and my other job is in procurement and marketing for Bartlett Cattle Company, which is just kind of a fancy way to say that I buy and sell cattle. For the young lady over here that's taking notes, feel free to edit me all you want to and make me as politically correct as you can. That's going to be a tough situation there. So we have a couple feed yards, and one in southwest Kansas, one in Panhandle, Texas. And I'm going to kind of go off the reservation. I don't think Joe's back there, so don't stop me, Joe, please. I'm going to talk about feeder cattle. This really kind of where the area that concerns us in the feed yards. We don't feed any cows, at least if there's any packer buyers in the room. That's my story, and I'm sticking to it. So we don't feed anything kind of over that age. So here I'm going to give you the perspective today as it would relate to traceability for the feed yards. And again, my points mainly are going to be about feeder cattle and how it relates to animal disease and traceability. I thought this might be the best place to start. I guess my box moved here a little bit, so you put a cowboy in charge of a PowerPoint. I'm more of a big chief tablet guy. It's hard to tell him what you're going to get. But this is the black dots here represent feed yards that are over 4,000 head capacity. And this is a little bit of an older map, but as you can see, most of the cattle are concentrated here in the central United States. And this box actually should be over the Panhandle and go on into Nebraska, into Colorado, and that area. I don't know how it got out of whack, but that represents 80% of the fed cattle in the United States. Within these black dots, there's 11.7 million head of cattle. That's a tremendous amount of cattle. These cattle all come from different areas. I'm going to talk in a little bit of generalities right here, but most cattle flow into these feed yards from each coast. The East Coast, the West Coast, they all kind of flow to the middle. Most of the cattle flow from south to north until you get into Nebraska, and Nebraska will get cattle kind of from the Dakotas and in Montana that way. Now, there's exceptions to that, but for the most part, you know, these cattle are kind of flowing in this area. We receive cattle in the Panhandle of Texas from some from Canada, but most of them have come from areas in South Texas, Oklahoma, New Mexico. We do get a few Kansas cattle in. We get cattle from as far away as the Virginias, California, and we've even gotten cattle in from Hawaii. One thing we do get a lot of cattle in Texas is from Mexico. Those cattle are brought up, and I'll speak more to Mexico because I'm not really familiar with how the Canada cattle get brought into the United States. But Mexico cattle, they're gathered down in Mexico. They're kind of gathered up down there. They're brought up there. They're scratched. They're scraped. They're sorted. They're handled tremendously, and then they kind of go through a funnel there with the USDA inspections, and then they get widened back out once they cross on the U.S. side, and they get sorted again, and then they get distributed out throughout the United States. It's glad to hear that we've got some pilot programs going for traceability for cattle coming into Mexico. I think that's very well warranted and something we kind of need to make sure we continue to expand on. So there's a tremendous amount of cattle in commerce every day. A small feed yard may only get a load or two cattle every week. Some of the bigger feed yards may receive hundreds of loads of cattle every day. I'll give you an example. There's some multi-feed yard companies out there. Take one, for instance, that has 500,000 head capacity. We'll turn that capacity about 1.8 times a year. So his buying needs are about 900,000 head of cattle a year. That's 2,400 head of cattle every day, 365 days a year. So when you see us in back of church checking our phone, I am probably trying to buy a pen of cattle there. So we all kind of do it, don't we? Looks to me like through all of this that we have some vulnerabilities. I think that was a great term that I heard earlier in the speaker. We're vulnerable here. There's a lot of cattle moving. There's a lot of cattle that aren't traced. You take, for instance, some of those cattle that go through a major auction company. They may get gathered from the southeast, go through a major auction company in the Midwest or in the central U.S., and then distributed all throughout these feed yards. Well, we don't really know where those cattle came from once they kind of hit that auction. We don't know what they were exposed to. We don't know the animals that they were exposed to, and we don't know where they ended up. I mean, I think it can be traced through certain ways, but it's not going to be very quick. So we mainly have a lot of concerns with that and how disease traceability can affect us in the cattle feeding sector. I think these next few slides will kind of distribute this a little bit better. This slide is beef exports as a percent of production. As you can see, back in 99, 2000, 2001, we were rocking along pretty good. And that's where most of our expansion is coming through, is through export markets. All of a sudden, we hit 2004 and 2005, and we went off a cliff. That was the BSE case, or as we affectionately refer to it, it's the cow that stole Christmas. It really devastated our industry. It really set us back pretty hard. Here's another slide that kind of how it hits, and I heard somebody ask earlier, well, what value of exports go to us? Well, this slide right here is the U.S. beef exports value per head, and this slide is for every animal that's marketed in the United States. In 2017, it was worth $335 per head. It's projected in 2018 to be $343 per head. Yes, sir. Not with me, I don't. This slide was provided from CattleFax. I'm sure that they've got the breakdown, but that $343 was directly due to exports. I'll get to that here in just a minute. So the $343, this is a breakdown between hides, variety meats, and cattle. So Take for instance, I mean, this is I think a big key value right here. We know we can argue about the actual value, but we know that a tremendous amount of value comes from exports. If you have another disease outbreak and we fall off that cliff again, you take a $750 calf that you're raising and you take $350 away from him, you're in dire straits. So it's a tremendous amount of money that can be there. And one more deal is a slide I've got here to expand on this is U.S. beef exports right here. And again, it kind of shows back in 3 and 4 how we fell off that cliff. Well, the big thing on this slide is that look how long it took us to recover those markets. You know, it was 8, 10, 12 years before we actually got back up to the values that we were before we had our outbreak of our cow that stole Christmas. That's a long time to recoup these markets. We've got some really great people working for the U.S. Meat Export Federation and are really working hard over in some of these markets that we're exporting to. And we kind of cut the legs out from underneath them if we can't trace these diseases back quickly and efficiently and get to there. So, you know, if we have another disease, I'm not going to say that we're not going to lose some of our export market, but that's our biggest room for expansion right now in how quickly we can recover those markets. I mean, you take, for instance, you know, we have a feed yard that's got 100,000 head in it, and you deplete that inventory by $350 a head, that big sucking sound is a lot of money that's leaving us pretty quickly. So cattle disease and traceability continues to be a concern in the cattle feeding sector. Foreign and domestic consumers are asking us for disease traceability. And there's growing competition among foreign markets for animals that have disease traceability. We don't want to get out-traded here. I mean, like I said, some of the big expansion for foreign markets. And if from someone that's traded cattle their whole life, if I've got it and my neighbor doesn't have it, I'm going to use that as leverage in order to get into those markets. And we've always been able to sell. We've got some of the best, safest beef in the world, and some of the best tasting beef in the world. But I guarantee you those other countries are looking at us and trying to knock us off our pedestal. So we need to continue to move forward on that. And I do think that what we do here, as far as cattle over 18 months of age, has a direct impact on what we're going to do for feeder cattle. It directly involves that, and some of the parameters that we set, I think we need to keep in mind the feeder cattle aspect about this, because we don't want to set some rules that just work for 18 months of age and won't work for cattle under 18 months of age. One other thing that I'm going to bring up here is what we're doing in Texas. So here back last summer, we were trying to bring some policy issues through the NCBA and kind of ran into some stumbling blocks and things that we didn't understand. Some pushback we were getting from some cow-calf states on animal ID and animal disease traceability. After that was over, and I made a call and got together with some of the leadership of the Texas and Southwestern Cattle Raisers Association, and we sat down and we had a kind of a small meeting, and we decided that yes, this was something that we needed to look forward to what we're doing and move this traceability idea forward. So what we did was we created a small group, and this was not anything to do with the working group here. This was an independent group on its own from members around the state of Texas. And we came up with this vision. And it says the Texas cattle industry that can quickly trace cattle in order to contain incidents that is insulated from domestic and international market reactions due to such incidents, and that can take advantage of emerging market opportunities. And we kind of came up with a mission statement that says this: by January 1, 2020, have a functioning voluntary cattle source verification service that would facilitate disease traceability, provide added value to industry segments through market information sharing, support value-added marketing programs, and be expandable to a national level. We kind of set some parameters going forward on that, and I'll kind of quickly go over these just a little bit. But first and foremost, we want voluntary participation. We want the industry oversight and management, equitable to all industry sectors. The cow-calf guy is usually the first guy that gets hit with this, and our pushback from him is that why do we got to be the first guy? We got to spend the money on the tags. We've got to be the guy that registers them. We've got to do that, and we've got to answer those questions for them. We want to maintain data privacy under control of the cattle owner, and we want to prevent data access through FOIA. Again, we're going to incorporate common industry practices, operate at the speed of commerce, credible in domestic and international markets, compliant with state and federal health regulations, and allow limited access by state and federal cattle health agencies for disease traceability. We want this compatible with cattle identification and verification requirements for process-verified marketing programs. Encourage participation through incentives, and I think this one's a key one. If we can find some way through this system that we can encourage or create incentives, then I think we get more people to buy in. Provide a framework that can be expanded to a national level. We could have easily stuck this into a Texas verified program and left it at that and marketed Texas cattle. But if we can set the framework to help move this ball along for animal disease traceability, that's what we wanted to do. And utilizes electronic identification technology to the maximum event possible. One of the things with technology is that we see all kinds along the segments of technology. People that are right on the cutting edge and guys that are still using flip phones. So, You've got to be able to answer all that. And I think if we can keep it simple, keep the buy-in kind of small, we can get more people involved, and then we can start expanding and trying to move up to some cutting-edge stuff. But the technology that we use has got to be, and I've said this before, in my opinion, has got to be kind of bulletproof. It's got to be field tested. We're going to get one good bite at this apple, and if we stumble on technology, if we stumble out there and we put a bunch of tags in cattle's ears and they can't read them at the sale barn, or they get a bunch of misreads, or much like the bar tags, you've got to sit there and wipe them off every time. Well, we just can't afford to make those mistakes right now. So with that being it, I sure appreciate your time and the ability to come up here and talk to you, and I will move along.
Well, good morning. I'm Myriah Johnson, and I work at the Noble Research Institute in Ardmore, Oklahoma. If you're not familiar with where Ardmore is located, we're about halfway between Dallas, Fort Worth, and Oklahoma City, right on Interstate 35. At the Noble Research Institute, we are an agricultural research organization, nonprofit, and we work to solve ag's great challenges, and that's really our task and our vision that we have. And so as part of that, we do industry collaborations, and so I wanted to share a little bit with you this morning about one of those pilot projects that we have going on. And so when I first talked with Katie about coming and speaking here, I wasn't sure if I was a fit. I was a little bit of an outside to some of this, because this pilot project is not solely focused on traceability. And really, if anything, I would say that it was unintended traceability. And so this is about our Integrity Beef Sustainability Pilot Project and that unintended traceability. So this is a 2-year collaborative project that has 6 different partners. You can see their logos up here on the screen. You have us at the Noble Research Institute. We do research as well as consulting, so working with producers in the southern Great Plains, predominantly southern Oklahoma and North Texas. And as part of our work, we have a program called Integrity Beef, which is really the culmination of best management practices. This program has been in place for 18 years. They've had a value-added sale in Oklahoma City every December for several years now. And these cattle are backgrounded for 60 days before they go on to the feed yard. And so the feed yard that we're working with is the Beef Marketing Group, which is a cooperative of feed yards out of Kansas and Nebraska. So in this project, all of these cattle, which is about, we have a little over 2,200 head on feed right now at BMG, and then next year we'll have approximately 5,000 head of cattle in the project. These cattle will be slaughtered by Tyson, and then those trimmings will go to Golden State Foods, and then ultimately onto McDonald's to be served as their hamburger beef patties. And so you ask how this might have come together. And so many of you are probably familiar with, there is the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef, and all of these folks that were listed on that last screen are members of the U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef. And that U.S. Roundtable for Sustainable Beef has been together since 2015. And as part of that, they have put forth indicators and metrics trying to define what sustainability looks like for the beef industry among all the different segments in the supply chain. And so as they were sitting there, and folks kind of started talking with one another and saying, okay, well, we've put all these indicators and metrics together. How do we know if they're actually any good? Do they tell us what we think they're going to tell us or indicate? And how do we test this? And so as those folks were sitting around talking, they each were representing a different part of the supply chain. And they said, you know what, let's put together a pilot project to test this out. And so that's really what we're trying to do here. So yeah, we're trying to improve the sustainability of the entire beef production value chain, and we want to see if this can be a model, potentially for the U.S. beef industry. And as I mentioned, with those indicators and metrics from the roundtable, we're aligning with those, and obviously to do this, we're having to integrate all phases of the beef supply chain. So as I've alluded to, we have those cattle that are being sourced by the Noble Research Institute through that Integrity Beef program. As well, at Noble, we are handling all of the data collection and management that's going on with this. Then once those cattle are at BMG, they're handled through their progressive beef system, which again would just be another best management program that's in place at that feed yard. Tyson Foods gets and purchases those cattle. When they're finished, they harvest them, they provide those trimmings, and ultimately we have hamburger patties out of that. And so really to achieve all of this, there had to be an element of traceability. And so that's how we stumbled into this and having unintended traceability. And I really think that sustainability is wholly dependent on having traceability. You can't say that a product is sustainable without knowing where it came from and all the practices that went along with it along the way. So as I mentioned, we're tracking our progress towards those metrics, and we're going to evaluate the performance, but then also look for future indicators and metrics and see, well, what else would better answer our questions and tell us about sustainability. And really the piece, I mean, all of this project was exciting to me, but probably the most exciting piece to me was that we were going to document and share that information from each phase to really increase our efficiency. And so what that means is that our producers that we work with, those cow-calf producers, they receive that feedlot and carcass performance data back. And I think that's a really big game changer, you know, if we can move into a realm where all producers could get that back. And so I just wanted to focus in a little bit on that. So as I mentioned, all of these producers are going to get that data back, and so I really think that brings a lot of benefits back to a cow-calf producer. I do have some of those cow-calf producers that I work with say, it doesn't matter if you give me this data back, I'm not going to know what to do with it. I don't know how to interpret it. But I think that's a problem that I would rather have than not having that information at all. Because as a cow-calf producer, I don't typically get that information back unless I take on that risk and I own those cattle all the way through the feed yard and through harvest. And now there are some feedlots out there who are willing to share that information back with producers, but that is not the common case throughout the industry. And so these producers, in receiving this information back, they can make those improved management decisions. They can look at their animals and genetic selection. I think we can speed up the pace at which we're able to make improvements. We can look at animal efficiency, not only at a feed yard level, but we can tie it all the way back to a cow-calf level, look at what other management pieces might influence that. We can look at the health of these animals. We've had struggles with the health of animals in feed yards, and we have consumers constantly coming back and saying we don't want antibiotics to be used. Well, now we can be better stewards, perhaps, of those antibiotics and the ways that we use them if we can look at the health of that animal for its entire life. And we can look at the efficacy of vaccines as well. Some other pieces, I think we're probably a little bit disjointed in the beef industry in that as a cow-calf producer, or even as a stocker producer, if I take my animal to the sale barn, I get paid on pounds. And then when that animal gets to the feed yard and then that animal gets slaughtered, many times they're looking at what the carcass quality is. They're looking at things on the grid level. And so we're paying, and we're having two different objectives in our industry. We're paying some people to produce pounds and some people to produce a really great carcass, and those things don't always line up. And if we have traceability and we can pass this information back to our cow-calf producers, they can start moving towards that same objective too, and we can all rally around that together. I think having traceability where it comes back, and again, providing that information throughout the whole entire supply chain, allows us the potential to solve some bigger issues. Mike Sanderson, who's in the back of the room from K-State, through this, he knows some of the folks at the feedlot, and I actually got an email from him. They're working on a study about BRD. BRD has plagued the feedlot industry for a long time now, and I don't know that for all the effort we've put in that we've really made the progress that we want. And so if we can start tying some of this information back, which we're working with some of our producers that are involved in this pilot program, and they're willing to provide even further information about the way they manage their cattle and all these birth records and health processing records, management, feed, etc. Maybe we can start to crack that nut on some of these bigger issues and really, as in an industry, become much more efficient. And I think probably one thing when I talk to producers, something that I hear come out of their mouth, and I believe as a producer myself, is if this is going to be a voluntary system, they want some sort of reward for that. And I know there's not necessarily money just hanging out there right now to reward for producers for that. But if they're going to make the investment in putting these EID tags and getting the readers and all of these things, they would like to be rewarded for that time, that effort, that cost, because not many of them just have money and time to blow. And I think that's pretty evident by the financial situation of a lot of the producers right now and where we're at. And so if we can give them some sort of carrot to dangle out there, then they're going to come on board, and then hopefully we can show them and we can teach them that through getting their data back, they can make better management decisions and how that impacts their bottom line. I think a lot of producers understand, yes, it's important that we have a disease traceability aspect, and what that means for our export markets, and that's great, but just like the producer who asked the question of how much of that $343 comes back to a producer, I mean, it's this intangible thing that a cow-calf producer says, yeah, I get it, but until you make me, what real incentive do I have? And so if we can provide them with information, if we can teach them how to use this information, we provide a financial carrot to get them there until they see the true value of it themselves, I think that can really help and go a long ways. We've heard throughout the past few days a lot of the benefits to the beef industry, keeping our access to export markets, again, that antibiotic stewardship and showing that to our consumers, having increased quality of a product. Cow-calf producers typically were folks that want to get better. And so if you share with us ways that we can improve, we're going to go out and try to improve. We could potentially have increased efficiency, and so how kind of a few different ways we can increase that efficiency, and probably first is really just through communication. So if we think about how we transmit information through our industry, it's kind of smoke signals, and that we're sending a price signal back to a producer. And so when I take my calf to market, I may not know, did I get a better price this year or a worse price this year because of how my cattle performed last year, or is this just some sort of market effect? If you actually tell me, then I can go and do something about that. So that's that direct versus implied communication. Our speed of improvement, we've seen that a lot in the genetic side, how much faster we can start making improvements, and if we have this information throughout the whole supply chain, I think we can build on that and speed up our improvement. We can look at feed and water consumption, look at animals, and look at breeding for animals that have better efficiency, as well as in the health area as well. So it was said on Tuesday that traceability is a tool for increased business performance, and that really stuck out to me. I think as a producer and the producers that I work with, we don't hear traceability talked about under that light enough. We hear it talked about a lot in this disease traceability space, which again, I think everybody gets, but we haven't sold them on what other benefits there are for them. And so there's been a lot of talk about how do you implement a traceability system, do we make it simple and just get people on board, and probably so, but I think that we need to keep this kind of work in our vision, and once we have a traceability system in place, if we can get there, think about adding these extra layers as we go and really building the value for folks. So with that, those were just a few thoughts that I wanted to share on our perspective from Noble and the producers we work with. So thank you.